In today's video, I'll be completing my second sketchbook. I have about 8 pages to fill and I've decided to share the whole process with you of me completing the sketchbook, which also means that there's going to be a sketchbook tour coming soon. But for this video, we are just going to work through the next couple of spreads. Now, I am using my regular Hahnemuhle it's an ink sketchbook, but it does take watercolor and gouache as well. And I'm going to be using this one. I do have a few sketchbooks that I work with at one time, but this is the one that I've decided to complete. So you can see I'm starting off with a landscape. Now I am drawing a border around the area that I'm going to be painting on, just so that I can stay within the borders. It's not necessary, it is a sketchbook, so it can be messy, just as you prefer it to be, but I just wanted to keep everything as close within the line as possible. Now the scene that I decided to do for this spread was a sunset scene with a poppy field, and then you have these trees with the sun in the background. So the trees come up a bit dark over the sunset sky. So I'm working from the back forward. So the background is obviously we're starting with the elements in the distance, which is obviously the clouds in the sky. Then we work forward as we go through the distant mountains, and then we move closer to the poppy field with all the poppies. Now at first with the sketchbook, I wanted to keep it solely for Inktense or for ink or fine liners, but then I tried out watercolor on it and I see it takes watercolor well as gouache, so it doesn't really warp the pages that much, and I don't need to tape down the pages when I'm working with it. So it can take multimedia, although it does say it can take some wet media, but it works fine for watercolor as well as gouache. So you can see now I'm adding in some of the background foliage and the background plants, and I'm moving forward. Now remember, the poppies in the background are going to be very dense, and they're going to be growing quite clustered together. The closer you move to the viewer, then you're going to have them more spread out, and then they're going to be having more detailed, and they're going to be more individual, so you can actually see the individual flowers. So the point of this particular one is that I just wanted to have some time relaxing and taking my time and having a calm session, just painting and drawing. Remember, completing a sketchbook doesn't mean you need to rush through it and just get the sketchbook complete. You need to actually gain something from your sketchbook as you're working, whether it's practice, whether it's trying a new medium, trying a new technique, trying out different color palettes, trying to draw a new subject matter, or just taking some time to zone out and just focus on drawing or painting and just enjoy the process and just relax yourself and have like a relaxing session of painting. So that's what I found that's helpful for me when I work with the sketchbook, because once you start working, you actually lose track of time and you just can sketch whatever you want or paint whatever you want. You can even draw in it, whatever you feel like doing at the moment. You can do it. If you want to capture a particular scene that if you're outside somewhere, you can capture that. If you want to draw a reference photo that you're looking at, you're more than welcome to do that. A sketchbook is basically something for you to use, to benefit you, to be able to learn something from it and gain something from it. So you can see the video is sped up because obviously it was a very long video because I've done a number of different spreads. But I have taken my time and I worked very slowly through the pages as I worked through the sketchbook. And also it was not done in one day. I worked through the sketchbook over a number of days, taking breaks in between, coming back to it, working on a piece, then deciding what to do next, depending on what I feel like at the moment, and if I felt like doing a landscape or I felt like doing a particular portrait. All of that impacts me on when I work within the sketchbook, so maybe that could also be something that may work for you. Also, sometimes just looking at reference photos of different animals, or just looking at paging through some books with maybe nature photos of nature can trigger off something that I want to try out and a color palette I want to use, and then I can try it out and look for a reference photo that I can use for that particular drawing, whatever I decided to do. Now with this next one, I wanted to work again with watercolors, and I was just drawing this hummingbird with these little orange and really orangey reddish color flowers. I don't usually use a lot of orange in my drawings or my paintings, so it was actually nice using a different color for once and not going to my usual blues and purples and pinks, and greens, which is what I usually gravitate towards. So yeah, once again, I've done the sketch out, and then I slowly start building upon the sketch. If, for example, your piece doesn't turn out the exact way you want it to, that's not a problem. At least you tried, you learned from it, and you can move on to the next thing. That's the beauty of having a sketchbook, because you can work as much as you want in it, or you can try and experiment as much as you want in it. You'll see when I am going to do the sketchbook tour of this sketchbook, you'll see there's a couple of pages I didn't like. I just folded them over and left them in the book. There's others that I really don't know what I was actually just practicing and trying to do something with, but I just left them in and moved on and did something better in the next one. So every page doesn't have to be a masterpiece, and every page doesn't have to be perfect. The sketchbook is just there for you to have fun, enjoy, relax, and learn from. So you can see I'm adding multiple layers. If you would like to speed up drying time with watercolor, you can use a hairdryer on a low heat on a cool setting, just to dry the layers between working if you just want to save on time. But I did see that it dried quite quickly. It is quite warm in the area I'm in now, so I don't need to constantly be using the hairdryer. I can rely on the air just to dry it. Also depends on the amount of water you're using when you're using the watercolor. Another thing I also wanted to experiment when I was working on these spreads is trying to use the wet in wet technique, just to see what the paint does when I apply water and then apply different colors, and see how they mix and how they react with each other. So that was another thing that I wanted to experiment when I was completing the sketchbook. So here I went for another hummingbird. I found this reference photo, a royalty-free reference photo that I wanted to try out, and I just liked the colors because there was a lot of pink flowers, and the hummingbird himself had browns and some hints of pink and green in him, so I wanted to bring that into the drawing and into the illustrations. So I worked with watercolors with this one as well, and I also went through the layering process, and I think this was done over 2 days, if I'm not mistaken. I didn't complete it in 1 day. I think there was a storm coming, so I basically just worked on one part of it, and then I completed it the next morning. So you see, you don't have to complete a full piece in 1 day. You can take your time. If you get tired of it, or if you don't feel like completing it, you can leave it for another time. And even if you do return the next day, if you don't want to work on it, you can move on to something else and then return to the previous one at a later stage. Like I said, this was done over a long period of time. It wasn't just done over 1 or 2 days. I used a number of days to complete all these spreads. And remember, the intention of keeping a sketchbook shouldn't be to just complete the sketchbook. You should be learning something from it, and you should be enjoying the process, so that when you go through the sketchbook, when you're done with it, you can be proud of the pieces, and you can remember all the things you learned when you were creating those different pieces of artwork. A sketchbook is also there for you to just have fun and play around with and try things out. So you don't have to always take it too seriously. It's not supposed to be a masterpiece. It can be if you want it to be, but it's not meant to be. It's meant to just have fun, practice, and learn. So that's what I was using mine for, just to try different things and get an idea of how the paints work together and the subject matters, different colors, and obviously I was working a lot with watercolor. Like I said, there will be a sketchbook coming to do, or sketchbook tour coming to do soon for this particular one. I do have a number of sketchbooks that I work on at one time. One is just a general sketchbook that I use for mostly graphite drawings and planning, but I do use these other sketchbooks as well for planning as well. I do have another watercolor sketchbook I'm working on, and another sketchbook the same as this one but a bigger one. It's a larger A4 size, so I've also got that one that I've been working on. I've so far been using that for my animal habitat art series. So I do have a couple of sketchbooks that I keep going at one time, depending on the purpose for each sketchbook. So now I decided to just draw random objects, mostly books, keys, an hourglass, lock, candles, just to draw random items. And I'm using a sepia line maker to just outline everything, and then I'm going to come through with a wash of watercolor and just add some little bit of dimension, details and shadows to the illustrations. So like I said, it's just a place to play around in a sketchbook, so you can do anything you'd like to do. You can try out different things. You can try illustrations, drawings, paintings. It entirely is up to you. Obviously, the paper that you're using will make a difference depending on the mediums you're using, especially if you're using a lot of wet media like watercolor and gouache, and if you're using thick layers of paint as well. If you're using acrylic, I would suggest to gesso the paper before using acrylic paint onto your sketchbook. And then also, yeah, just have a thick paper that's able to take water and take multiple layers of paint. You can test it out with a small area and test it with a small drawing and see how it handles the water and how it handles the paint. Then you know you can work on a bit more complicated pieces or pieces that you want to do a lot more detail on. You can see I'm not being close. This I had no references really for these. These are just random objects. I did use here and there for the hourglass. I used a reference, and the keys I changed them. Actually, they were not the exact same looking keys, but I just want to get an idea of what they are and then draw them and then ink it and then obviously add watercolor just to bring some dimension to the objects. And then obviously I added a background around all of them just to add some color to the background of the page, just to make it look like they have something in the background and not just a stark background of white. Now this is actually the second sketchbook that I've decided to keep intact as a sketchbook. Usually I have a sketchbook. I think it's mostly the spiral bound sketchbooks that I used to use, and I would draw in them and sketch in them, and then if I had one or two pages that I really liked, I would just remove it from the sketchbook and then trim it and then put it into a portfolio file instead of keeping it as a sketchbook. But from the first sketchbook that I did last year, I actually realized the benefit of keeping a full sketchbook, and also the feeling you get when you complete a sketchbook completely and you have that entire book to page through, look through, and remember what you went through when you were painting, the memories, the learning experience, the practice, what you learned from it. You even can write some notes in your sketchbook. So if you got notes of certain things, you will see in the sketchbook as well. I tried all my different fine liners and multi-liners, tried them out with water, tried them out with the alcohol ink, just to see which ones react, which ones smudge, just so that I know for future reference which ones I can use for a drawing. And then I know not to use one that's going to smudge if I'm using it, for example, with watercolor if it smudges. So that's also a good thing to use a sketchbook for. You can also use it for swatching. If you'd like to swatch different mediums or a new medium, you can use it for that as well. But once again, I would always advise using a thicker paper. Sketchbooks allow you to use more mediums in it. You can see this drawing, for example, I kept it quite loose. I didn't go too much of detail. I do have the feathers, but because when I was painting over, I was losing some of those details with feathers, so I just went in with a very fine sepia liner and line maker, and then I went over all the feathers just to show the differences between the feathers as they overlap one another. But I kept it very loose and very simple, not too detailed, and I didn't add too much of shadows and highlights because I didn't want to make it look too three-dimensional. So if I would wanted to, I could have made them really detailed parrot drawings or macaw drawings, but I wanted to keep it quite loose and just simple, just to enjoy the process and just to zone out and relax and paint. So now I moved on to another sunset. This one has got a sunset, and then it has some birds. The sun is setting, and then you see these birds, the silhouettes of the birds flying over. So again, I was first painting without a border, and then I decided to put a border, but you will see I will outline it with the black watercolor later as we progress with the drawing or with the painting. But basically my inspiration for painting and working my sketchbook or for any particular painting or drawing is usually comes from looking at reference photos, looking at nature, reading, sometimes a movie. It depends on what it is, and it catches my eye, and I'll be thinking of something. I'll see maybe a sunset, and then I will look for a reference photo similar to that, and then I will try to replicate that in my own way onto my paper, or try to create that sort of image of how I felt at that moment and create that with the particular drawing or painting that I'm working on. So you can see I'm putting quite a lot of watercolor, or actually I think this is gouache. No, sorry, this is not watercolor, this is gouache. I am putting multiple layers of gouache. The reason why I'm using gouache is because it is opaque, so I can paint over lighter, over darker areas, and it will show through. So I'm using gouache for this particular sunset, and you can see it, I'm adding all the clouds in, and I am letting the layers dry between adding more color, because if I add over in a wet area, if I add more color, it's going to lift the previous layer, and I don't want some of that white of the paper showing through, because with gouache, that's one thing you can't do. You can actually reactivate the paint and then remove some of it, and it can lighten it up, especially if it's wet. So there you can see I'm going through with the border. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. Your sketchbook is just to have fun and just to practice and learn, so, and try new things, and just to, for me, it's mainly just to zone out and create and spend that time or that session just creating. So you can see I'm coming through with a graphite pencil, and I'm just drawing in all the birds, and then I'm going to come through with the gouache. I'm using black gouache, and I am adding a bit of a purple color to the gouache. I'm not keeping it solid black, and I'm just adding in or coloring in all those silhouettes of the birds. By drawing the initial sketches of the birds, it helps to know exactly where the feathers need to be shown with the silhouettes, because you're not depending on detail here, you're just depending on the silhouette or the outlines of the birds as they. And I'm just adding a few extra light highlights to the sun as it's setting. Remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. This is just something to practice with, so I'm not looking at it being too perfect. Okay, then for the last spread, I actually wanted to make the previous page the last spread, and then I decided to add two drawings. So on the previous page, I've done a door knocker with a lion with the ring around from his mouth, and then I did a sunflower on the reverse side. So it ended up being two more spreads. So you can see now with the lion and the knocker with the ring, I'm now going over with a fine liner, the sepia fine liner, and then I'm just going over, or line maker, and then I'm just creating that effect of a door. I am going to come through with some watercolor and start adding some washes to that, just to give it an indication of a door and add some definition to the lion itself, and add some shadows and details to the ring. Remember, these are not hyper realistic, they're more of illustrative drawings, so I just wanted to create a loose drawing with just an indication of shadows, highlights, and some of those tinted areas of some greens and a little bit of blues and grays on the line itself. You can see the wood also is a bit dry some places, so I'm also taking advantage of trying to practice using the dry brush with watercolor just to get some of those effects in. and just adding some shadows to the door. Nothing too perfect, just trying to get the look of the door knocker with the line. Now I'm moving on to the last spread. This was for the sunflower. I just wanted to end off with a sunflower because they are bright and they are a very light color. As I said, I don't use a lot of oranges as well as yellows much in my paintings unless it's required to use them for whatever subject I'm drawing. So I just wanted to incorporate some yellows. So you can see here I'm using watercolor and I am adding multiple layers of color, and I'm adding some dimension to the petals, as well as to, you're going to see me coming through with some browns and just adding some lines. Also adding a bit of orange, a little bit of hints of orange and brown mixtures just to get some of those differences in the colors of the petals. And going through with various browns just to get the centers of the sunflower in, and then I'm obviously going through with multiple colored greens just to get those leaves and stems of the sunflower. Remember, I'm not keeping it too detailed. I just want it to be a representation of the flower. Just as a final happy spread for the final piece for the sketchbook. You can see now I'm adding some of the darker shadow areas and lines just to define some of those petals. So here is a final flip through of the spreads that I created in this video. There will be a sketchbook tour coming through soon, most likely next week. And then you can see all the spreads that I've created in the sketchbook. Also, I'd like to thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, don't forget to like and share. Feel free to comment below and don't forget to subscribe. Till the next one, bye.